Well, this is Aaron Tiger here at Christ Church on Harvard as we are talking about the art of neighboring. And so we had a great conversation with Randy before. And today I want to introduce you to my friend Jennifer Prophet. She's with a group called the Hopeful Neighborhood Project. And Jennifer has some great stories about as an introvert, kind of loving her neighbors, living in rural, suburban, and also in urban settings and different ways in which they've neighbored. And just some great stories along the way of some practical things that you can do in order to love your neighbor. You're going to love this conversation that we had with Jennifer today. Well, we are back with Jennifer Prophet from the Hopeful Neighborhood Project. And so, Jennifer, just tell us, what is your neighborhood now? Where do you live? And what is a kind of a childhood neighborhood memory that you have?
Oh, well, those are two of my favorite things to talk about. So this is a great way to start. So I will start actually at the beginning. So
Okay.
I am from central Nebraska, and not like kind of a ranch area. So not an area that might look like from the outside that it has a lot of neighbors, but I actually grew up in a really close-knit community. We had our own
Okay.
little church and our own school. And so even though our neighbors were maybe a mile apart, or sometimes more, um, that we really relied on each other, and I didn't understand
Mm.
how different and how unique that was until I kind of moved away. But I used to, as I've been thinking about this, I'm like, I really grew up thinking there was nothing that my neighborhood wouldn't solve together. Like we
Okay.
we live so far away, if you call 911, they're not going to find you, or even if they do, like it's a 30-minute drive, right? So you call your neighbor first and then you call in
Hmm.
other help. We fought fires together. Like, it was um a really unique way to grow up, but I think
Hmm.
what it did is it really built that fiber into me that, like, you rely on the people next to you. You might not always like them even, but that's you're knit together in this way that's really important,
Okay.
and really critical, and that you actually have what you need right where you are.
Hmm.
And so as we talk more about the Hopeful Neighborhood Project and, like, the idea that God sort of gives you in your neighborhood something to start with, these strengths, was just built into me because I just really felt like there was always a neighbor who would have a cup of sugar if I needed it, right? It was like
Yeah. Yeah.
something that was there, and we relied on each other that way. So it was a really special way to grow up. And sometimes it gets nostalgic, but when I go home, that neighborhood is still that way. So it's
Okay.
not just like it used to be so good back in the day, neighboring. It really
Hmm.
is still that way. Like it's still possible to live in communities that have that sort of reliance on each other kind of aspect. So I'm really
Okay.
grateful that that is kind of the way that God raised me. I then moved into an urban setting for my first job. I lived in urban Chicago. And interestingly enough, it was actually a lot like a rural setting. Like there's those
Okay.
that same kind of interdependence in the neighborhood that I worked in Chicago. And that was really cool. Now I live in a suburban environment, and that's taken a little longer actually to find
Okay.
that kind of community. But I have it. It just took spending some good time outside and getting just getting to know people. And so I live in a really great neighborhood here that sometimes we talk about moving, and I've had dreams that I don't want to move because I don't want to leave my neighbors. It has
Oh,
nothing to do
wow.
with houses, but I'm like, no, no, I can't leave so and so. I wouldn't get to see their kids grow up, or how would I
Mm.
know what would happen in this situation? And so I'm really sold into this idea that God cares for us through our neighbors, and that's my story. That's why.
So, okay, so I've got a couple of questions rolling around in my head, but the first one is like, so what made the suburban neighborhood more challenging than the urban or the rural neighborhood, just in your experience?
Yeah, in my experience, and I think actually even research would probably back me up on this, it's built different, number
Okay.
one. So we're built like our houses are built to go in the backyard instead of the front yard. Some of you have probably heard that. And so it's built different, and our suburban lives tend to be different in that, like, we work one place, we go to school in another place, we go to church in another place. And so we're not home as much. We're not
Hmm.
gathering in the same spaces as much. We're in the urban environment and the rural environment. There was more common spaces, or more like passing each other as you go. So,
Okay.
if you're driving around the country, if any of you have done that, like I knew every car we passed. You wave or you stop and talk on the road because every single person you passed. In urban environments, you're walking a lot more, so you're seeing a lot more people that way. And suburban, like neither one of those things were really true. So it just took a little bit longer to be present and get to know people at that level. But it's still there because people are people. It took longer, and I think that's why.
Okay. Yeah, yeah. Well, yeah, because I think, I mean, I've lived in not really in a heavy urban area where like I'm in an apartment building or I'm having to walk a lot. But in the other places like a suburb, yeah, it's like I don't have to. I could live my life and never talk to my neighbors, right?
Right,
Uh,
right.
so I've when I was in Mustang, which is a suburb of Oklahoma City, everybody had a three-car garage, which meant even if you had a bunch of stuff, you could probably get one car in.
Right.
And so that was just, and that was the assumption. Everybody had a bunch of stuff and you lived in your backyard. So yeah,
Yep.
it's interesting all these different ways and the similarities and
Yep.
the differences. And yeah, you probably knew more people in a 5 mile radius of your small rural like spread out community, right?
Hmm.
Than a lot of people do in a city or a suburb in a mile radius around them, right? I
Yep.
mean, we have a different kind of idea
Yep.
of neighborhood. So one of the things when we talked a few weeks ago, you said we probably don't talk enough about the benefits of why being a
Mhm.
good neighbor is good for individuals. So let's
Mhm.
talk about some of the benefits. What are the benefits to somebody who knows their neighbors, who sees kind of being a neighbor as part of their life?
Yeah, well, I could talk a long time about it, but let me give you a couple of stories,
Okay.
okay? So I have 3 kids, and when you have kids, in on a bus and they're in kindergarten in my neighborhood, an adult has to be there. And I work from home, so that's not usually a huge issue.
Okay.
But one day I just missed the time. I was in
Mm,
a meeting, important meeting, and I looked at the time and my boss said, "Are you going to make it?" And I was like, "Nope, not going to make it." But I'm like, "Don't worry, my neighbors got me," right? So it was a quick
mm,
text. I had 4 people at the bus stop who the bus driver knows and I know who I could say, "Will someone grab the kids off the bus? I'll be there in 10 minutes," right? And
yeah, yeah.
it didn't break anyone's routine, right? And then
Mm,
that particular day, one guy got them off the bus and I passed and he's like, "I've got a meeting, but they're on Joy's porch." Like the kids were sitting on another neighbor's porch because we're all just sort of in it together.
yeah.
Um, I think another just sort of benefit, we don't have a lot of family close. And so that means that like the neighbors that are grandparents here are grandparents. And
Okay.
so one neighbor literally left a Christmas present in my kids' little playhouse mailbox every day of December during COVID, just as with a special note of things they notice, of what they do. Like, I noticed you really listened to your mom well, or like, I noticed you helped out your brother, or these little things. Those are the benefits of having sort of life together. There's practical benefits. There's like pick up the mail from the porch or roll in our thing. But then there's like the emotional and social benefits of having this community, that's helping supplement the life that you have. You know, whether like for me, I get the benefit of kids, but for them, they get the benefit of kids right next door
Yeah.
that they get to pour their life and their wisdom into. And for the young couples around that don't have kids yet, they get to watch all of this kind of in the community and
Hmm.
ask questions and know what's coming for them and in them. And so there's a lot of social emotional benefits, of kind of living life, knowing each other as opposed to just coexisting.
Yeah. And I think that's, yeah, knowing versus coexisting. It made me think of there was a church I was at years ago, and there was a couple a grandparenting age couple that their kids lived in Tennessee and they were in Oklahoma. And they decided, we're going to volunteer in the kids ministry by faith, that there'll be other grandparents who will volunteer by faith, for our
Yeah.
kids. And
Yep.
this sort of communal way of thinking um, about life is again a very different way. Why is it that the way that why did we get away from neighboring? As this is how I'm doing it, and maybe I'm wrong. Is it kind of seems like kind of live your life separate, and or we're in community, and then we waned from that a little bit of like just kind of do life together, and now it feels like we've kind of turned a little bit. What does it mean to be a good neighbor and other such stuff? Why did we kind of get away from it?
I think that, there's some practical, like, we just got away from it because we started building houses differently, and we
Hmm.
started being able to drive, and gas is still expensive, but it's affordable for most people in a way that it's not in other countries, or maybe it didn't used to be
Okay.
here, so you can drive a little bit more. There's those practical things, but then I also think, that our American culture really preaches individualism,
Okay.
and being individually responsible, which is a great thing, individually independent, not stressing the people around you sort of is a value that we have, right? Like I
Yeah.
take care of myself. I'm not relying on everyone else to take care of me. And so I'm not going to go see if my neighbor has that cup of sugar because I should have planned ahead and got enough sugar for this
Mm.
recipe, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
We really value that individualism, and I'm not putting that down. I just think that maybe that value of being so self-sufficient accidentally made us islands,
Okay. Okay.
and didn't allow us to rely on each other. Because I don't know about you, but I do know that most people, if you ask them, "Do you like to help?" They will say yes. I'd be happy to give my neighbor a cup of sugar. But if you ask them, "Do you like to ask for help?" Nobody wants
Mm.
to do that, right? Like, well, I don't
Yeah.
want
Yeah.
to ask somebody, but we know that it feels good to give help, and so we need to like I think we got away from it because of that, and it's something that we could challenge ourselves in getting back to. It is actually giving people the opportunity to help us because it makes them feel good. Like it's
Yeah.
okay to ask for help because it actually gives someone the opportunity to feel valued in their help to you.
Yeah, no, that is, I mean, I remember thinking I had a hard time getting gifts sometimes, and sometimes still have a hard time receiving compliments or these other things.
Yep.
And I don't remember what it was that somebody said or did that helped it click to no, 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 you are taking away the opportunity for somebody to give you a gift, whether
Yep.
that be a word, and if you don't take it seriously, oh, don't say that. I don't,
Right.
almost a false modesty kind of a thing. And then yeah, same thing with our neighbors. It is so good when somebody, I'm not a particularly handy person.
Hmm.
So, I mean, I can watch YouTube and I've done that before, but there are some things it's just like, I just need 5 minutes of somebody who knows what they're doing and
Hmm.
they will drop everything because again, that purpose and that value, and
Yes.
we've stripped
Yes.
that away.
Right.
And I think we're experiencing some of the consequences. I mean, we could talk probably about loneliness for a long time,
Right.
and the devastating effects that has. I mean, one of the statistics I saw that it's the same loneliness has the same detrimental health effects as smoking 15 cigarettes a day.
Yep.
Um, so, and I think of and the numbers are incredibly high. So probably on wherever you're living street, unless you really do have this neighborhood that's kind of been building, you have, every other house, there's somebody who's dealing with loneliness.
Yep.
Um,
Yep.
so how long have you lived in your current neighborhood?
6 years.
Okay. How long did it take before you felt like these are my neighbors? How long I mean, because you've been
Mm,
intentional. How long did that take?
it's a good question. Because COVID was in the middle of it. But I'm
Okay.
gonna say probably 3 years.
Okay. Okay.
That's probably a little different for everyone, and COVID is a weird thing in all of our lives, where it hit in our stage and what we were doing and all of that. But I'd say about 3 years for it to really feel that way. I will also say, though, that it was amazing in my situation, but I'm going to guess that your stories, you could find it if you're looking at your own story. The first night that we moved in, a neighbor came across the street and introduced herself and said, we found out that she went to our church, what was going to be our church, we assumed and was true, that was kind of across the subdivision. So we didn't
Okay.
move into this subdivision with the idea that we were living close to the church. In fact, on the address of the church, it like Google mapped it wrong. So we didn't have that idea, but it was wonderful because it's like God sort of baked this community ready for us. And
Yeah.
even though you all won't have that story, like that's very specific to my story. I'm pretty sure if I went back over each place that I lived, I could watch how God had like sort of been creating the place ready for me,
Mm,
ready for my gifts, but not just for my gifts, but with people with gifts ready to pour into my life. If I really like tracked all those stories. And so even though it takes a while for it to feel, I think maybe like home and like it's
okay.
really your place, I think that you'll start to see like signs early on of that, those seeds being planted, and you just kind of got to water them and watch them grow,
Okay.
and be intentional about that.
Yeah. Well, I think about, um, when we moved, so we moved just under a year ago. Um, and so we had a house, we had an area of town that we were looking for.
Hmm.
Right. We kind of knew where we wanted to be. And we had some things in a house we were looking for.
Hmm.
But
Right.
the neighborhood, what we were looking for was, it wasn't bad, right? Like, not like, you
Yeah.
know, you kind of drive around and you see the houses and you're just like, okay, they seem to take care of their houses on this street and on this little area. Okay, we're good. But and so I think about, okay, I want to be in an area of town. I want to be in a town. I want to be in a house. I hadn't really thought about, like, I want to be, being in a particular neighborhood, or thinking God wants me to be in a particular neighborhood. So
Hmm.
I can't remember their last name, but they wrote a book about Place for a Purpose. Is it McKinney? Is that
Hmm.
the last name
Yes.
of those folks?
Hmm. Yes.
And just that idea. I love it whenever I can, like, just remember a title and I think, okay, I get it, right? That,
Right.
we're Place for a Purpose in our neighborhoods. What if not just that house is your dream house, but what if that neighborhood is God's dream neighborhood for you?
Hmm.
And just a great thing. So now I would want people to hear about the Hopeful Neighborhood Project. So what is the Hopeful Neighborhood Project? How did it get started? If I assume I've never heard about it, what do I need to know?
Sure, I'll do my best. So the Hopeful
Okay.
Neighborhood Project really, is what we like to say is we equip and inspire everyday people, to kind of live into that role they have in their life as a neighbor.
Okay.
Because just like, I grew up far away from people, I was still a neighbor. So it really doesn't matter who you are, where you live, you are a neighbor. And
Hmm.
so we want to equip and inspire you to live into that role. You're also
Okay.
a daughter and an employee and all these things, and you think about, how do I be a good daughter? How do I be a good mom? Or how do I be a good, boss? We think about that, but we don't spend a lot of time thinking about, how do I be a good neighbor? And so we want to inspire you to do that and then equip you to do that as well. And so we have a 3-step process that can really help you, um, come up with some ways that you can work in your neighborhood, particularly with other neighbors.
Okay.
The first step of that process is discovering the gifts. And what we've recognized is that the first gift you have in your neighborhood is other people, and we don't always know them.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
we developed a lot of resources to do that very first step of the first step of to, get outside in your neighborhood and start to discover the gifts that are in your neighborhood. Meet your neighbors, learn their names, learn something good about them, some gifts that they have. Everyone has gifts.
Hmm.
As Christians, we believe that God created each and every one of us with gifts. He created us on purpose, and those gifts are for sharing. So but we
Yeah.
don't know how to ask people to share. We don't know how to, appreciate the gifts that they have to share if we don't know them. So, and don't know what their gifts are. So, if it's the 3-year-old who's got the gregarious personality, get to know her name and that gift she has in the neighborhood. If it's the, retired music teacher who's a shut in, find out that she's like a gifted music teacher and that she's a shut in, and, see what you can do with understanding that that's a
Hmm.
gift that she has in the life situation that she's in. Um, so that's what we do.
Okay.
And then we have some other steps of the process we can work you through. But for many of us, it's just really living into that first, discovering the gifts in our neighborhood and our neighbors as gifts.
Yeah. And so if you go on the website, you can sign up to be on, like, your mailing list. And then I got this I love my neighborhood journal. I don't know if it'll
Yes.
show very good on the camera. There it is. Which
Yeah.
is really cool because it was super practical. Like, there's bingo, what are the gifts? And so what are your gifts? What are the gifts of the neighbors that you know?
Yep.
Just different ways to be able to do it. So this is a neat little thing, and that's just go on the website and just
Yep.
sign up.
Yep,
Um,
just say get started and we send that to you. And then you've got an email that also gives you some links for other things. Um, if you're you'll get that regardless. Most of us are digital, and yet having something in your hand to walk outside with or whatever. And so I'm like, we're sending that.
yeah,
But there are
I,
other resources as well.
and I really thought that just for me, I mean, because as I was doing research for our sermon series that we're in, and I was just I came across it, and And I thought, how cool, like something in the mail. There is a, because I think part of being a neighborhood is it's an embodied experience, right?
Mhm.
That you do, you're seeing people, you're, waving, you're speaking,
Yep.
it's not digital contact, it's actual contact. And
Yep.
there's a just a gift. I mean, there's a gift in digital contact. We wouldn't do this otherwise. But again, I think having something that's tangible is really a
Yep.
good,
Yep.
wonderful, a wonderful thing. So, and so for the Hopeful Neighborhood Project, my understanding, so you all are Lutheran based. Is that like kind of out of the Lutheran movement? Is that right?
Yes. Yeah. So we were started by Lutheran Hour Ministries, which is a Christian kind of mass media organization. Has
Yeah.
started with a radio program in the 30s. We're in a lot of different countries, do a lot of different kinds of ministries. And one of the things we wanted to tackle in recent years, because we were started as a lay movement, so not church workers, we went and grew to this large organization. We wanted to really look at what is a lay movement of
Mm,
Christians look like today? What is really like church, not just church leaders, but Christians, moving because of they're motivated by the gospel. What does that look like today? And this is what we found. This is what we decided. We're like, it's really people living out their faith in their everyday lives, living
yeah.
into that vocation that we just haven't talked about a lot. It's a beautiful gift to the world to be one of these people in your neighborhood providing that, and it's biblical. I can talk about the Bible, stories of this, but it's actually a way that God cares for you, back to those
Mm,
benefits, right? Like
yeah.
God, I don't live close to my family because I'm in church work, and because that's just not the way it worked out, right? My husband
Yep.
doesn't live close to his family. So how does God take care of us? He gives us our neighbors, and so we want to be a blessing to our neighborhood, but God actually, blesses us this way too. And so that's the
Mm,
movement, and kind of what we wanted
okay.
to reinvigorate with this is like, what does it just look for Christians to be on the move in the world today?
Yeah, yeah. And I appreciate, I mean, uh Christian is not always well received. Sometimes it's like very well received, right? And other times it's not well received. And so I appreciate the way that you guys you're about neighborhoods. You the first thing you don't see is Jesus, but you do see, I mean, obviously it's embedded in everything that you do, and it is part of like what you can find. So it's not like a secret. We're
Right.
trying to be a super secret organization, but it's also,
Right.
if somebody who was not a Christian just wanted to be a hopeful neighbor and wanted to love their neighbors well, I think they would find that
Yep.
and think, yeah, this is good, good stuff. Now, you used a word, and I think it's what we talked about it again when we talked previously. You used the word vocation, um,
Yes.
and you gave me a good description of vocation, but I have since forgotten it. So I'm going to put you on the spot to
Right.
see if you could tell me what is. So for somebody out there who they haven't really, they thought about maybe career, they thought about maybe having a job, but what is this idea of vocation, and why does that matter, and why does how is being a neighbor a vocation?
Yeah, so Luther talks about vocation as like being a mask of God. So like how you're interfacing with the world is your vocation. And so that looks that can look like I'm a shoemaker, or I'm a this, or I'm a daughter, I'm a son, right? But how I'm showing up in that role is the way that people see Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
And so neighbor is just one of those roles we don't often talk about, one of those vocations, one of those ways people can interact. And so that's why we call that like a vocational role, that maybe we don't talk about as much. And I think that's how I described it, this sort of
Okay.
like mask of God. Luther
Mm-hmm.
also talks about, and other theologians as well. I just know Luther the best. But he talks about, if you're a shoemaker, I think is the famous
Mm-hmm.
quote, like, I'm gonna make the best shoes.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's how God's showing up to that person. And so like that you show up with quality, you show up with integrity, you show up in these certain ways. And that's then how people really experience that goodness of God. And so we've thought a lot about, what is a good neighbor? That's a cultural shift. A good neighbor used to be all the things I talked about. Now it's more like quiet and leaves me
Mm-hmm.
alone.
Yep.
And so we're changing that language to also be kind of an engaged neighbor. How do you show up vocationally? You engage. You're engaging, and that's really what we want to make good neighboring about, is engaged neighboring.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. and I'll be talking to David Burton, and that's part of his work too, the Engage
Yep.
Neighborhood Project. You all chose hopeful neighbor. Why hopeful? Why does that matter?
Oh, yeah, that's a good question. So I think there's one of our second step is called imagine the possibilities.
Okay.
And I think hopeful kind of encompasses that same kind of
Mm,
imagination piece. I mentioned just a little bit, but we're the community development philosophy that we're built on is called asset-based community development. And so what that means is it's opposite of deficit-based, right? Instead of looking for problems like what's wrong in my neighborhood or what's wrong around me, we start with assets. What do we
hmm.
have? We
Yeah.
have neighbors and they have gifts. We have these things and they have gifts. And then what do we do? How do we link those together? How can we imagine what we could do with those things? And that's part of our process, but it's a really hopeful view. It doesn't
Yeah.
mean that every neighborhood's good, or that all of that. But it doesn't matter what kind of neighborhood you're in. There's gifts there. You can link them together, imagine things to do with them, and that's just a hopeful sort of asset based, possibility focused way of
Okay.
being. And so that's why we chose the name because it doesn't matter where you are. There's a way to look at how we use these gifts and what God's given us in a
Yeah.
hopeful uh,
Yeah.
kind of posture.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, I think obviously, I think the gospel's full of hope. I think that's such a key part of like what we
Yeah.
believe in is that it's going to
Mhm.
get better, and it's going to be the best. And and I think that no matter where you are, you need hope, right? If things are good, you still need hope that things are going to get better. I mean, and there's a
Yep.
lot of people who are just like waiting for the other shoe to drop, and they need hope
Mhm.
that, you know
Yep.
what, maybe there's not another shoe. And if there is, it doesn't mean that it's over, right? And then, like you said, people in other neighborhoods that may not look the best, but oh man, we do have,
Mhm.
we've got these folks who are here, and what if we did this, or what if we've got this pond in our neighborhood, or whatever it is, that we
Mhm.
have something that is there. Now, your third step is pursue the common good. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, pursue the common good. So, like the practical, what does that mean for us? Is it means like if you just stop at the dreaming and the imagining the possibilities, you actually don't get that much more hopeful, right? It's a great posture to have, but things don't really get better if you just stay there. And so for us, imagine or pursue the common good is about making a plan and working it.
Okay.
But I also think that it speaks to the language of that speaks to this idea of working together and really
Mm,
even speaks to this idea of a difference in the Hopeful Neighborhood Project than some other projects that even Lutheran Hour has done in the past is there's not a like last step of here's where I tell you about Jesus.
mm,
And it's not to say that we don't want people to be living out their faith and speaking their faith in the lives into the lives of other people. It's not to say that.
yeah.
It's just to say that that's not always the that's not the end goal that we have together. We want to
Okay.
pursue the common good together because that's really a creation call for us, right? God created Adam and Eve and told them not to go tell everybody about Jesus. He said, take care of the garden, right? That his goal of them taking care of each other and taking care of the garden was the purpose of creating them. That
Yeah.
he did that before the fall.
Mm,
And so we get invited into telling people about Jesus, and that's a privilege and a gift. But we were created to take care of the world. And so pursue the
mm,
common good is like we're created to take care of the people around us and take care of the world together using these gifts that God gave us to do that. Like that's the point. And so that's our last step is like actually work a plan together to do something good. Weed the center median in your neighborhood or serve on the school board or
yeah.
take care of watch out and make sure that the littles aren't in your neighborhood that all the cars are driving slow and that the little people are
Mm.
safe on their bikes, like pursue the common good together, do things together to take care of this world that God's given us.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. And so, I mean, kind of you all could help a neighborhood if they kind of got serious to kind of walk through these
Yep.
steps, and if it was something bigger. So that's one process. What's been like the most encouraging, like neighborhood story that you all have been a part of?
Um There's many I could tell. I'm gonna give you 2.
Okay.
So the first one is a neighborhood that we kind of walked together with, and what was so cool about this neighborhood, we watched them through our whole process, and they started out with kind of this. Lived here a long time and I kind of like my neighborhood, whereas most of them. And then kind of like, okay, here's the gifts. And they got excited. And then they kind of, tapered off. And then at the end, when we had them really making this plan for pursuing the common good, it's a neighborhood that has not had a lot of attention historically, kind of felt behind. And they found that in their midst, there was someone who could train um, in mental health first aid. Like that
Hmm.
was her job. And she was new to the neighborhood. They didn't know anything about this, but they realized that that's something their neighborhood really needed and they could provide it. And they could provide it. They had space in the neighborhood. They had restaurants in the neighborhood. They had the trainer in the neighborhood. They could train themselves. And it was such an empowering experience to watch them literally be in tears
Hmm.
because they could use the gifts they had in their neighborhood and it unlocked like we can fill a need in our neighborhood with things we already have. you
Yeah.
know
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, it was just like literally they were moved to tears
Mm.
about how much that impacted their connection to the neighborhood. And that was powerful for me. It was early on. And so it really showed me the power of this process and just of unlocking people giving gifts to each other. Just recently, we had a woman who had been through this process and she stood up and spoke to the whole group that we were meeting with and said, I just want to say that I've lived in this neighborhood a long time. I own businesses in this neighborhood, and today, thinking about the gifts and looking at the people around here, I fell in love with this neighborhood all over
Mm.
again. And that actually really touched me as well because I will say often people don't do good in their neighborhood because it's a bad neighborhood or because it's a good neighborhood. They do good in their neighborhood because it's their neighborhood,
Okay. Yeah.
because they fall in love with it all over again, right? You're like, this is
Yeah.
my home. This is where God put me. This is where people around me that I love. I love that there's a mural here. I love this restaurant. I love this. I love all the things about my neighborhood. And then when we fall in love with something, it makes us motivated to do things for it. And so
Hmm.
I just loved her saying that without any prompting from me. Like I fell in love with this neighborhood
That's
all over
cool.
again. And I just loved that. And I hope that for each and every person who's watching this video,
Yeah.
just do something to fall in love with the place where you live. It's just a wonderful feeling and it's just so motivating. And Christ's light then shines through that kind of passion for the place you live.
Yeah. Well, and just what a gift it is when you do. You love the people you're around, you love the area that you're around. I
Yep.
read this article and I can't seem to find exactly where the quote was. And so, but it talked about the obvious truth that life is better when you live close to people that you like.
Mhm.
And it's like, duh. I mean, like who wouldn't want to live, like, and if that's, um, you know, and, and especially if you could walk to somebody's house, right? Or just drop by.
Yep.
And again, some of that depends a little bit on your neighborhood and how you're structured and all that kind of stuff. But um, it's good to be able to just do that. But it takes
Yep.
some work, it takes some time. And one of the first things you got to do is like get out of your house. So what are
Yep.
what are like 5 things? And if you come up with 4, you come up with 8, I don't really care. What are something around 5 things that somebody can do to have an excuse to go outside and
Mm,
just be
mhm.
present with their neighbors? What are some of the things that you've done or that you've seen other people do?
Yeah. So yeah, get outside into your front yard. Find excuses to be in the front yard. Maybe you put out some extra plants that are in the front yard so that you have a reason to be out there a little bit more often. Put a chair in your front yard to sit out and read it. Just find reasons to be in the front yard. I think that's tip number one. Tip number
Yeah.
two, if you're going to take a walk, try to take a walk in your neighborhood. And the reason for those kind of together is if you're just walking, you're a moving target. So if you're just walking and someone else is just walking, you may miss each other. You may see each other though. So get out and walk. But if you're sitting, the people who are walking
Hmm.
will walk by you. if someone else is sitting and you're walking, you will see them because there are other people who can't walk in their neighborhood, but they will sit on their front porch to get fresh air or whatever.
Yeah.
So get out and move about in your neighborhood. And then, so that's two. A third one would be like find ways to use your gifts. Think about what your gifts actually are. So if it's, serving on the school board, serve on the school board. If it's, baking cookies, if it's gardening, maybe garden in the free spaces. If it's some leadership, maybe think about, is there a neighborhood association? Is there an HOA? Is there, think of some things that are easy and fun for you. Don't think of the hard things that you've like read other people did and were successful, because you won't end up doing those. Think of things that are easy and fun for you, and then think about like, how could I plug those in
Mm,
to be closer to people around me? Like, try for that not to be 20 or 30 minutes away or in another neighborhood. I know how we're organized in neighborhoods now. Sometimes it's hard to be super local about those things, but
yeah.
think about gifts and then think about how you could use them as close to possible as where you live.
Mm,
Learn people's names. That's a big one. When you have a chance, learn people's names, figure out how to remember them. So write them in the little book that you get from the Hopeful Neighborhood Project, put them on. Some organizations have magnets you can put um on the refrigerator door and write them down. Find what works for you, but like get to know people's names and then see if you can go one step further in staying connected to them. Remember their name, learn their dog's name, find a gift for that they, and then write that down next to it. I like, Gardner, or works here, or has a son named Bill or George, or
yeah.
a daughter named Holly. Think of some things that you can start to get to know people at a little deeper level, so that you start to really feel like you live in community together, that
Mm,
you know people.
yeah.
Those are five. I don't know if that was clear,
That was
but there
great.
you
Yeah, yeah,
go.
yeah, yeah. Well, and you kind of mentioned to me last when again we talked in that about the Bless app, the Bless Every Home app, and being able
Yes,
to, and that's been a great tool. I mean, we've had, I want to say, I over 70 people in our church download that app and
well done.
and be able to, because it's right there. It has their names. You can put
Yep.
notes. And so, I was in the, I was driving home and I saw a couple doors down. There was this couple and they had people in the front yard. It looked like they were practicing a play, which was kind of a strange, like, is this what is this what it looks like they're actually doing? And so then the next day they were back out there. And like one day I walked by, the first time I walked by, and I sort of like I wanted to interrupt because I knew the neighbor not well, but I knew him enough that, but he looked like he was busy coaching a play, and so I just thought, okay, I'll just go on. And then it was 2 or 3 days later, I kind of went over there and I was like, were you all doing a play in your front yard? And he's
Uh-huh.
like, yeah, I own the Tulsa Shakespeare Company and we're putting on a play tonight.
Oh,
Over, and it's an outdoor place, so we needed to practice outside, and it just, so I jotted down Tulsa Shakespeare Company,
yep.
and he invited us to come. We couldn't come because we had a thing with the kids that night, but I thought, man, otherwise it'd be, I'm not really into Shakespeare, but I'm into different things, right? And
Uh-huh.
so
Right. And I'm
that'd
into
be fun.
supporting my neighbors, like showing up and like watching them use their gifts. It can be a fun thing. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. So, anyways, it was just, but it was helpful for me to be able to write that down. And I think that's one of the things um, in church world. What I've noticed is people, it's like I've been to church with this person for 4 years and I don't remember their name.
Mhm,
I feel embarrassed, so I'm not going to go forward. I do the same thing in my neighborhood. It's like, man, I've met that guy 2 doors down 5 times and
mhm.
I can't ask him his name again or I'll be embarrassed. Can they please just give me the wrong mail one day so I can get it and go down there?
Right.
But I think that app or other tools, or just writing
Yep.
it down, is just gold, to be able to do it. And it does show that intentionality. Hey, hey, your
Mhm.
son, was just got back from the war. How is he doing? I mean, whatever it is
Yep.
that you can be able to have those conversations with,
Yep.
is so good. So yeah, get outside. In Oklahoma, it's like 100 degrees right now. So get outside early is what we tell
Right. Get
people.
outside early, take some water, sit outside with a cooler of water and anyone walking by.
Oh yeah. Well, that's what I had a
Those little
lady
things.
at our church, and that's what she said. She was a retired nurse, and she saw her neighbors across the street working out in the yard in the hot afternoon sun, and she just went over there with a couple of bottles of water. She said, the nurse and me just can't help myself.
Yep.
I want you to make sure that you're hydrated. And she's like, they drank the waters, they took a break, we had a little conversation. And it's those little things that,
Hmm.
again, just spin and just again start stirring this neighborhood.
Yeah. I had
Um,
a woman last week. I was walking my dog and I'm a little bit of a new pet owner and I took her too far. Like it's hot and I just didn't realize. And I was like, oh goodness, I need to give her a rest. So I let her kind of lay down. And this woman came out of her house. She said, I'm sorry, but I saw you through the kitchen window and I was wondering if your dog wanted some water. And so then she brought water and she brought a bowl out and we had a lovely conversation because she was just willing to like come out and help someone who didn't know what she
mm,
was doing clearly. So yeah, just to watch, yes. You're not hurting people's feelings by looking for their needs and like stepping out. So yes.
yeah, yeah. And again, I think it's so great. And I think that, I mean, I think, we do have such a suspicion of other people.
Hmm.
But they have a suspicion too. And if you can break the ice with positive,
Uh-huh.
whatever it is, here's a water, here's a, hey, how are you doing? Just a wave.
Yep.
I'll run sometimes in my neighborhood and I wave to everybody.
Yep.
And I tell you, like one of my favorite moments running was I was running and I saw a guy and he was running. We were on the sidewalk and he's like, just gave me this high five. And like it
Yep.
just, I mean, runners, and I don't consider myself like a hardcore runner. I don't know if you run or not, but like I did a sermon one time about runners and they did like this study, and like 40% of what runners think about is how miserable they are. Like, this hurts and there's this hill coming up and how much further do I have to go? And
Right.
so, if you could just distract them for a few seconds, you've made their run. And so
Uh-huh.
that high five, like, I was just thinking about that for like half a mile after that. Like, that felt so good
Yep.
um,
Yep.
as well. Okay, so somebody, again, just go onto the website, hopefulneighborhoodproject.com.org,
.org. Yep. Hopefulneighborhood.org.
hopefulneighborhood.org.
Mhm.
And they can do that. And we'll probably put links on the bottom and that kind of stuff. And so if they just want to, and so if they're just interested, you all have a blog on there that talks about just different ideas about neighboring.
Yep.
There's like National Neighbor Day coming up in September, I think.
Yep.
Um,
Got it.
and
September 28th. David will
oh,
probably talk about it as well, but
okay,
National Good Neighbor Day is a really good reason. Like it's nice to have a time on your calendar that you're like, I'm going to like do something intentional about neighboring on this day. Cause it's you for most of us, it's a good intention, right? I'm gonna do
yeah.
that. I'm gonna like take that, I'm gonna take cookies to everybody tomorrow, maybe next week. So National Good Neighbor Day is a good one to write down, September 28th.
We have some neighbors a couple doors down who I bet they were new to the neighborhood, and they just had a baby. And we have wipes sitting on our dining room table for at least 2 weeks now. That's like, oh, we'll take those over there too. And thankfully, they're not expired yet, but it's like, oh gosh, yeah. So that's a good
Yep.
thing for people maybe to circle and just think about
Yep.
what it is. And I think part of part of loving is just risking, right? There's a vulnerability. And so
Yep.
they may not be friends. They may not appreciate it. They may not come to the door. They may
Yep.
not, but that's okay, like you still need to be a good
Right.
neighbor.
Yep.
And sometimes if you go with good intentions, people will receive that very well. So
Yeah, most of the time they will, and a lot of times if they don't the first time, they will the second time, and I gotta say, like, this neighbor that brought water out, there was a day that my dog was laying on her grass, and it was early, and she opened the door, and I thought she was gonna yell at me, so, like, I moved on, and I've been avoiding that house because I was afraid. I didn't know, and so I was afraid, and I thought, what a lesson to myself of like she was
mm,
who knows why she was coming out that day. Maybe it was to yell at me. I don't know. But like we need to give people more than one chance. Because a lot of times, so you might catch them at a bad moment, but you're gonna be showing up the way that you want to be, the way that God intended, and that eventually will usually pay off.
yeah,
It
yeah.
might be the second time. It might be that they want to just really see what you're about, so that's right. Be willing to take the risk. Once in a while, the risk is it gets a hard lesson, but most of the time it won't, and almost always it'll pay off over time.
Yeah, yeah. It kind of makes me think of Home Alone and like Kevin McAllister's neighbor, the gruff old man, and
Yeah.
that, and then they had these moments, and then he came through at the end. If you hadn't watched Home Alone, I'm sorry to spoil the movie, but it's been out for 35 years, so you should know what it is now. Um,
Right, right.
yeah. All right. So I have some rapid fire questions as we
Okay,
go.
great.
Okay. So just like top of mind, don't feel like this isn't the deep thought kind of stuff. Just see
Okay.
what it is that comes out. So what is your favorite word?
Fantastic.
Fantastic. All right. Favorite sound?
Oh, laughter.
Laughter. A particular laughter?
My kids' giggles.
Okay. Okay.
Or
Um,
any kids' giggles, really. I'm a kid person, so I
okay.
I
Okay.
love kid giggles.
Yeah. 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 Well, you've been at VBS, so I'm sure you've heard some of
I've
those.
been at
So this
VBS,
week.
I was a teacher, kid giggles are
Okay.
that's what inspires me, that's what fires me up.
That's awesome. That's awesome. What is the most unusual or unique thing in your house?
Mm, in my house. Um, we have a really blended house, a really blended kind of cultural house. So I would say like we have a lot of like palm tree kind of inspired stuff and cowboy hats. So
Okay.
that's the most unique thing.
I would say, yeah. I mean, neon, like neon lights and cowboy hats, those things seem to go together, but not
Right,
really
right,
palm
but
trees. Yeah.
right. Not as much like Caribbean stuff and the cowboy hats. Yeah.
Yeah. Who or what regularly inspires you?
Mm. That's a good question. There's so many things going through my mind of who or what regularly inspires me. Um, I'm gonna say my kids again. Again,
Mm,
because I'm a kid person, but I find a lot of times if I just listen to how a kid is processing things, I get so much clarity, right? So when I was
mm,
teaching kindergarten and trying to teach the Bible stories and like listening to what they had to say, I would get so much clarity about like what God really means. Same thing about just for my kids when they like say something back, I'm like, oh wow.
mm.
That's a really good thought, or that's a really good observation, or like I'm inspired by kind of a child's ability to break down to the world in really practical
Okay.
pieces.
Yeah. So as a parent, what's the best piece of parental advice, or what is your like go-to parental advice? What do you tell people that have kids, whether it be a baby or 12-year-old or whatever?
Um, I'll say two things. Number one, I love how each life stage and each role you play shows you something different about God. And so parenting
Mm,
has been a way that I can really understand how God loves me
okay.
because I can translate it in a different way, right? Or
Hmm.
how he's taking care of me in ways I can't see because like that's what I do for my kids. They don't know all the things I do for them, but that doesn't mean I'm not doing them, right?
Okay.
And so I get that's one. It's just like enjoy like how you can understand God better in this new role
Mm,
that you have for new parents. And this I think the other thing I'd say as advice is like there's no doing it right or wrong. Like know yourself and know your kid. And
okay.
like trust that. Know yourself, know your kid and trust that. People are going to like there's books about everything, but none of them agree. Don't find one that's the right one because then that one doesn't work for your kids, but it worked for your best friend. There's no doctor that has the perfect advice. They're all going to contradict each other. So like think about yourself and then look at your kid and like do what's right for that combo.
That's awesome. That's really good. Um, where who do you like what's a book I should read or a podcast I should listen to or something that like people don't know about this thing, but they should know about this thing.
Mm. Let's see. I I have been reading currently The Art of Gathering
Okay.
by Priya Parker. And it's been really great for me as I'm thinking about this neighboring. The Art of Gathering is it's not just about neighboring, but it's about business and everything, thinking about what's the purpose for why you're bringing together people together. And it shouldn't be just like because I'm bringing people together, it should be disputable. Like it has
Mm.
to be a reason of like why some people shouldn't be there.
Okay.
Because that will make your purpose like so I've been following her just the last couple weeks, but I'm like, this is really, really helpful and everything we do involves gathering. And so really helpful. So I would say that's something that's recently
Okay.
been really capturing my imagination and I've been telling everybody about. So there you
That's
go.
awesome. Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, that's good. I haven't heard of that. So that's but it is fascinating and dispute. Yeah, that's I think about like the churches gathering and scattering, like
Mhm. Yeah.
and so much of that is life too. Of
Mhm.
like, should kids be in worship? Well, yeah, that we should gather together, but we also need to like experience life like a VBS or whatever it is, scattered,
Right.
right? We come together, we go apart. Same thing. I think in some ways the church has failed neighbors because we've said, come to us, and we've taken, fathers and mothers out of their house. We've taken neighbors out of their neighborhoods so that they can do church things, right?
Mhm.
And so instead of scattering them, which is part of what we're
Yeah.
trying to do as a church right now, it's just like you are placed for your neighborhood for a purpose. We do want to do
Right.
things in our church neighborhood, but
Of
also boom.
course.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Take that and
So
go out. Yep.
yeah, one of my favorite people that I want everybody to know about is a guy by the name of Steve Cuss. He wrote a book called Managing Leadership Anxiety. He has a
Oh.
podcast called Being Human. This is actually where a lot of these questions are inspired by, is what he does on
Uh-huh.
his podcast. He calls it the gauntlet. And this is his like ending question. For most people is when have you most recently felt the most loved?
Mm. I just had a birthday, so that obviously is a date that people feel the most loved, but my nanny who works for us in the summer showed up, and I'm a big sports fan, and I really loved the show Ted Lasso. If anyone of you
Okay.
know that, and Ted Lasso, um brings biscuits for his boss in this little pink box, and it you don't know, it never says this in the story, but it hints it and you see it. He makes them, but she's trying to find where to buy them.
Mm,
And so my nanny showed up with biscuits for the boss in a pink box. She couldn't find one, so she painted it. So she found the recipe, she painted it, and she showed up with my favorite coffee and biscuits in a box. And I felt loved all through that day. But that really set the day off because it was so personal to me and such a
yeah,
like an extra step. And so yeah, that was a really special moment. I'll always remember this birthday because she showed up with biscuits in a box with biscuits
that's
in a box from Ted Lasso. So I loved that.
that is, I mean, yeah, to be so like, you had to explain it, right? Like if you said, "Oh, I got biscuits in a box," and it's like, no, 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 no. Like there's a personal nature, right, of being
Right.
loved that you have to do. So, well, that's
Right.
great. Yeah, yeah. Well, Jennifer, thank you so much for your time, and we really appreciate it here at Christ Church on Harvard, and I know hopefully some of our folks will go check out the Hopeful Neighborhood Project, as we just again, it's I think maybe you or somebody said, neighboring is more of a crock pot than it is a
Yep.
microwave. And so it's just,
Yep.
you can't do everything, but you
Right.
just keep moving that direction. And so,
Yep.
do you have any final words of wisdom or insight that you want to share? It's something I didn't ask about.
Not necessarily, but just
Sure.
come on over to the Hopeful Neighborhood Project. I will say the couple of things there. We do offer free coaching. And so if you're kind of like, I really want to do this, but like here's my contact story. I'm missing some imagination piece or like whatever. We don't just have resources that we offer in general. You can like pop on my calendar anytime and we can talk through your context and I'll brainstorm with you. And we call it coaching because coaching is like inspiring accountability, like giving some specific directions or steps to follow. And so feel free to use that as a resource if you're a person who's really been inspired by these messages but feels like I don't know if that's me. Also, you should know I'm a pretty extreme introvert. You won't know that because I'm on camera here. And so this doesn't take an outgoing, like great at hospitality person. And I can help you think through that too. So that's where the giftings come in. Go with
Mm,
what you're comfortable with because that'll be easier for you. So I just say, if you're inspired, there's something for you. We can help in all of our resources, but also we've got coaching and I'm happy to do that with any person. So that's just something I offer as a gift to you as well as a closing thought.
that's awesome. Well, and again, yeah, a lot of people are introverts, and it's just like I can't. It is so stressful for me to even think about walking up to somebody. How do I initiate a conversation? So I'm glad to be able that you
Same.
you added that there at the end. So
Yeah, same. I just make myself available and smile. And then I do the best I can to like make myself say some words. And it's
yes.
worked out okay. It's been really great for me. So you can do this.
That's awesome. Yes, yes. Well, thank you very much, Jennifer.
You're welcome. Blessings to you all. Thank you for this opportunity.